Alright, let's learn all about conditionals in C#. So conditionals is what enables us to code decision inside of our games, which means that with one C# script, there will be several possible outcomes. Let's take a look at some common examples in game development. For example, if you've got a special key, then you can enter in this room, or maybe if you've got 0 health, then you want to show a loose screen, or maybe if you've got more than 1000 experience points, then you can level up your character. There are hundreds and hundreds of scenarios where you'll need to use conditions inside of your game. That is why this is one of the most important topics in game development. So the way we create a conditional statement is as follows. You first of all write the keyword if, then you put a pair of parentheses and you finish off with a pair of curly brackets. Inside of the parentheses is where you put the condition. So here is the place where you'll use our conditional statements that we have learned all about in the previous videos. And finally, inside of the curly brackets is where you'll put all the codes that will run if the condition returns true. In other words, if the statement was true. So let me give you a super simple example. Let's create an integer variable called health and we will set it equal to 5. Then we will create a if statement that will check if the condition health less or equal to 0 is true. And if it is, then we will simply print out to the Unity console, you are dead. If we would run this code like this, it will not print out anything to the console because our health variable is equal to 5, which is not less or equal to 0. But now, if we change our health variable to be equal to 0, then this time the condition would return true and so the message you are dead will get printed out to the Unity console. Let's have a look at another example. Let's create a string variable called player name and set it equal to Bob. Then we will create a if statement checking if the length of the name variable is less or equal to 3. If it is, then we will print out a message saying you have got a small name. If we run the code, it will print out the message because the condition is true. The word Bob has a length of 3, and so 3 is less or equal to 3, and so the code inside the curly brackets ran. If we now change the name variable equal to Liam, it will no longer print the message because the condition is no longer true. Liam has got a length of 4 letters. In C#, we can chain together multiple conditional statements just by using the else if keywords. So for example, right after the closing curly brackets, we can write else if, followed with a pair of parentheses and followed again with a pair of curly brackets. Else if statements work exactly the same as if statements, so the condition goes inside the parentheses and the code that will run will go inside of the curly brackets. For our example, we can choose a condition like name.length less or equal to 5, and if it is true, then we will print out a message saying you've got a medium name. So if I translate this code in English, it would say something like this. If the name has got 3 or less characters, then we'll print out you have got a small name. If it doesn't have 3 or less characters, then we will check if it has 5 or less characters. If this is true, then we will print out you've got a medium name. Note that you can add as many else if statements one after the other as you like. One important thing to keep in mind is that this else if statement will only run if the condition above did not get called. So if the name is equal to Bob, then it will not run even though the condition is true. And the reason is because the if statement got called already. So it's important to remember that these are fallback conditions that will only run if the ones above did not get called. There is one last keyword for conditionals, which is the else keywords. We can put it either after a if statement or after a else if statement. To make an else statement, you just have to write the keyword else and then put a pair of curly brackets in which you will put the code that will run. As you might notice, the else statement does not have any pair of parentheses in which we could put a condition. This is because the else statement doesn't need a condition. It will always run if the above conditions are false. Basically, it will run if the if and else if conditions did not get called. So in our example, we can create a else statement right after the else if statements. Inside the curly brackets, we will print out you have got a long name. So if the name is not less or equal to 3 letters, and if the name is not less or equal to 5 letters, then we will say that you have got a long name. Else statements are the last line of defense. They run when all else has failed to be true. Okay, with that said, let's now go inside of Unity and test all this out in our code. So I'll right click and create a new C# script called Conditionals. Then I'll double click on it to open it up inside of Visual Studio. I'm going to start off by creating 2 integer variables called respectively number 1 and number 2. Then I'll create a string variable called action. inside of the start function, we'll create a if statement checking if the action variable is equal to the string add. If it is, then I'll print out number1 plus number2. After that, I'll create a else if statement with the condition being action equals subtract. If this condition is true, then we will print out number1 minus number2. Moving on, we will create another else if statement, checking this time if the action variable is equal to the string multiply. Of course, we'll print out number1 times number2. Lastly, we'll create another else if statement, and this time we will check if the action variable is equal to the string divides. And like you guessed, we'll print out the result of number1 divided by number2. Now, if you remember from your math classes, we cannot divide a number by 0. And in C#, if you try to divide a number by 0, it will actually give you an error message. So to take into account this scenario, we can add to the condition using a double ampersand symbol and another statement. So we will simply check if number2 is not equal to 0. There is another way of adding this safety measure. We can actually embed if statements inside of if statements. So in this case, we could say if number2 is not equal to 0, then we can print out the division. Else, we'll print out a message saying that you cannot divide by 0. So if the action variable is equal to divide, then we enter in the block. After that, we're checking if number2 is not equal to 0. If it isn't, then we can just print out the division. But if it is equal to 0, then we'll print out an error message. Okay, finally we'll finish off with an else statement, and in here we will want to inform the player that the action that he typed in could not be found, because remember, this else statement will only run if all else has failed to run, which means if the action is not equal to add, subtract, multiply, or divide. Alright, so now let's save our script and go and test this out inside of Unity. Before anything, let's remember to remove the old script and to drag and drop our new one onto a game object in our scene. Let's start off nice and simply by setting number1 to 10 and number2 to 5. Let's type in add. If you press play, you should see that 15 gets printed out to the console, which is of course the result of 10 plus 5. Okay, so now let's change add to subtract and see what happens. So now instead of adding up the two numbers together, we are subtracting the two numbers together, which gives us the result of 5. Let's now test out the division, so we will change up the numbers to 10 and 2. If we now press play, it will give us 5, which is the correct answer for 10 divided by 2. So now what will happen if we change number 2 to be equal to 0? Well, thanks to our second if statement, we're not getting any bugs and we're just informing the player that they are not allowed to divide by 0. Finally, I will test out to see what happens if I write nonsense for the action variable, and yep, it works beautifully. We are getting the message that says that the action does not exist. Alright, so now let's conclude. So we have learned about 3 super important keywords, which are the if, else if, and else. The if keyword is the first condition. Else if keywords are if you want to have multiple fallback conditions, and the else keyword enables us to have a default path in case all the above conditions did not get called. Alright, I hope you can start to see the power of conditional statements, but don't worry, we have just skimmed the surface of their true potential. In the next video, you'll have a quick assignment so that you can train using these conditional statements, and then we'll be creating a fun console game using everything that we have learned so far in this course, and especially conditionals. So lots of exciting things are coming up. Anyways, that's all for this lecture on conditionals. I'll see you in the next video.